This deal fails completely.
Not one Republican should vote for this deal. It is a bad deal.
This deal is absolutely one of the biggest abominations since I've been in Washington, D.C. What did Republicans get?
Oh, I mean, I could totally tell you what Republicans got out of this deal, which is pretty much everything they wanted, even though they're going around and pretending as though this debt ceiling negotiation resulted in progressives of all people getting everything they wanted. No such thing occurred. Progressives got nothing. Democrats, honestly, the corporate Democrats got what they wanted, which was spending caps on government programs, with the exception of defense spending. And what's amazing to me is you have the Republicans pretending as though this is just a massive spending bill when it is exactly the opposite. I mean, you could consider it a spending bill if you take into account the increased spending for defense. But just to give you a quick reminder of what House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and President Joe Biden agreed upon, here's what we know. It might change, but here's what we know. The bill text applies Congress's pay-as-you-go rule, otherwise known as PAYGO, which requires new spending to be offset by savings elsewhere, to executive actions. That would mean presidential actions like student loan forgiveness would require a huge offset. So the PAYGO rules in Congress essentially serve as a massive obstacle in getting anything material passed, anything that actually benefits ordinary Americans. And now, because of this deal, should it pass, the executive branch would have to deal with PAYGO rules as well. Is that something that progressives wanted, or is that something Republicans wanted? Let's keep going. The bill would also place a cap on non-defense discretionary spending. So any government program that offers any support to ordinary Americans will be capped. Negotiators agreed to cap annual discretionary spending for 2 years, okay, 2 years, keeping non-defense spending levels flat next year and raising them by 1% in 2025. That means funding for most domestic programs such as housing, education, and road safety initiatives will stay the same next year at around $936 billion. Now, it sounds like they're just capping spending for these programs, except when you take inflation into account, it ends up being a cut in spending. But there's more. Obviously, we've also talked about the work requirements that will be implemented in regard to individuals who need to rely on food stamps. Food stamps, not really where I would look to cut spending or essentially provide more obstacles for people who might need that assistance. People who qualify for SNAP benefits get about $6 a day. The idea that we need to do away with these types of programs or severely cut them in order to pull America out of a terrible deficit situation is laughable to say the least. But let's be clear about something. That is what Republicans wanted, not something that progressives wanted. Nancy Mace, who of course is a Republican congresswoman, went on Jake Tapper's show on CNN today and said that this bill is a massive handout bill to progressive priorities. What a laughable statement, what a comical statement to make. And of course, Jake Tapper didn't push back and ask for specifics. And to be clear, there are no specifics because this bill gives Republicans what they want. And all of the huffing and puffing that you're seeing today from the Republican Party is just theater. And I think that they're trying to squeeze Democrats, squeeze the Biden administration into essentially providing more concessions. Now, the deal, by the way, also raises the age limit until which able-bodied, low-income adults without dependents would be required to work to receive food stamps from 50 years old to 54 years old. The expanded restrictions would expire in 2030. Of course, this doesn't take into account the fact that we're dealing with record low unemployment, that people around the age of 50 certainly experience age discrimination in hiring practices. But let's just ignore all of that and make it even more difficult for people later in life to get the assistance they may need as a result of not making enough money in this hellscape economy that does not really do much to increase or keep wages up to pace with inflation. So there's more. Homeless people and veterans, I should note, will be excluded from the new work requirements. But there is also a massive favor to tax dodgers, right? So in another concession, writes Time, to Republicans, not to progressives, to Republicans, the Biden administration agreed to claw back $20 billion of the $80 billion in new IRS funding that was designed to crack down on wealthy Americans and corporations that evade taxes. So if you're a Republican lawmaker, and I would love someone like Jake Tapper who has the opportunity to ask these questions to Republican lawmakers, I would love him to ask this, okay? If this is supposedly a handout to progressive lawmakers, if this bill is just chock full of all sorts of provisions that the far left wing of the Democratic Party would want, how do you take into account the cut to resources that would allow for the IRS to do its job and ensure that wealthy tax dodgers no longer get away with refusing and failing to pay their taxes? I mean, if the idea is to respond to the deficit with the urgency it deserves, how do you justify allowing people to dodge their taxes, which robs the American government and the American people of the resources they need, right? The $80 billion toward the IRS was supposed to end up increasing revenue for the federal government by ensuring that we collect more taxes to the tune of $200 billion. But of course, Republicans aren't serious about their concerns regarding the deficit. The deficit explodes under Republican leadership. That was certainly true under the Trump administration, and this nonsense continues. So look, the only thing that Democrats did in fact get out of this deal was something that specifically benefits one Democratic senator, and of course, that's Senator Joe Manchin, one of the most conservative Democrats in the Senate. So Joe Manchin managed to slip into the deal a provision meant to accelerate the construction of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which of course is a multi-billion-dollar natural gas pipeline in his state that runs through his state, that's been repeatedly stalled on environmental concerns. So if this bill passes, he is going to get exactly what he wants. This is something he's been very focused on. He will not let it go. He's very persistent. And so he snuck this into the debt ceiling negotiations. And of course, Biden is doing him a solid, even though Joe Manchin is the one who served as one of the major obstacles to Biden's agenda, the Build Back Better agenda. Okay, so apparently all of these concessions to Republicans isn't good enough. And apparently corporate media doesn't have the, I don't know, mental capacity to ask follow-up questions when Republicans come on their shows and pretend as though they didn't get everything they wanted. So with that said, the far right wing of the Republican Party is now threatening Kevin McCarthy, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. They argue that, maybe they should consider revoking Speaker McCarthy's speakership role because he didn't do a good enough job. On a House Freedom Caucus call Monday night, for instance, Representative Ken Buck, a Republican from Colorado, floated using the motion to vacate, a rule that would allow any House member to force a vote to remove the speaker, two sources familiar with the call said. Then you have Representative Paul Gosar, a particularly nefarious figure in the Republican Party. He proposed using the threat to force McCarthy to allow members to amend the bill on the House floor under an open rule that would stall the bill's passage. Fascinating. Lauren Boebert regurgitated that point. So let's take a look at what she had to say while talking to Steve Bannon.
This, at the speaker's request, is what I've heard. This was to be a closed rule with no amendments allowed.
At his request.
That's what I'm told. Yes. The speaker's not told me that directly. But now we have members who are working in the Rules Committee, who sit on that committee, saying, let's look at these amendments and consider opening it up. That's the way it should be.
What amendments? What amendments, Lauren Boebert? What amendments, Paul Gosar? What amendments, Ken Buck? What exactly are they unhappy with? There will be increased spending on defense. There will be a cap, which translates to a cut when it comes to all other non-defense discretionary spending. There are work requirements implemented for the neediest people in the country, those who rely on SNAP benefits and food stamps. What more do they want? Matt Gaetz is continuing on with this ridiculous theater. Let's hear what he had to say.
If the speaker puts together a Democrat-Republican vote yes for this, what will the Freedom Caucus do if the people who are objecting to this bill get overridden? If the Republicans get overridden by a Republican speaker teaming up with Democrats to pass this bill?
Again, I think the operative question there is whether or not the speaker can get to a majority of the majority. If a majority of Republicans are against a piece of legislation and you use Democrats to pass it, that would immediately be a black letter violation of the deal we had with McCarthy to allow his ascent to the speakership, and it would likely trigger an immediate motion to vacate.
Well, I guess now Kevin McCarthy needs to call Matt Gaetz's bluff, because they did, in fact, work with Democrats. And this is something that I find particularly disgusting on behalf of the Democratic Party. The fact that they would fight so hard to pass this bill that provides so many concessions for the Republicans and provides nothing for ordinary American people who voted them into office in the first place is just absolutely disgusting. So I want to go to a set of graphics. This series of tweets tells you exactly what happened, what Democrats in the House did to aid and abet Kevin McCarthy and Republicans in ensuring that there would be a House vote today on the debt ceiling bill, okay? So Grace Seegers writes the following: in a break with tradition, enough Democrats voted for the rule for the debt ceiling bill to pass. Traditionally, the majority party is expected to carry the rule without minority support, but 29 Republicans had voted against it. Democrats waited until the Republican noes were out before voting in favor. So get a load of this. 52 Democrats voted for the rule, allowing it to pass. And when I say allowing it to pass, I don't mean the bill itself. They voted in favor of a rule that will allow for a House vote on the debt ceiling bill. Okay, that's what Democrats engaged in. And House leadership, Democratic House leadership, I should say, with Hakeem Jeffries, serving as its leader, has already agreed to essentially doing what he can to ensure that this massive bill that's full of concessions to Republicans gets passed. He supports it. He made that very clear this morning. But I do want to just quickly speculate in regard to what it is that Republicans are so unhappy with. Now, I do remember that during the negotiations, an issue regarding making some of the Trump era tax cuts for the rich permanent, that came up. So as far as I know, the current iteration of the debt ceiling bill does not include making permanent the Trump era tax cuts for the rich. That could change, because remember, what Republicans are engaging in right now is theater. But there's something else, something that I didn't actually think Republicans were serious about, but maybe they are. So Republicans allegedly wanted not 2 years of spending cuts on non-defense discretionary spending on government programs that help ordinary Americans. No, they wanted 10 years, a whole decade of spending cuts for these government programs. So is that what they're holding out for? Who knows? But one thing that became clear to me after listening to Lauren Boebert speak to Bannon about why she's so upset, she didn't specify what she wants exactly, what kind of amendments she would present at the House, but she did seem to really, really care about being able to do these hearings, to have these debates. And really, those are the opportunities that members of Congress, both on the left and right, have an opportunity to provide this illusion of governance, right? These debates on the House floor, these hearings that they engage in, that gives the American people the idea that they're actually fighting for you, that they're trying to work for you. It's a part of their campaigning. And so the fact that they want to debate this on the House floor, propose amendments without even specifying what amendments they're fighting for in the first place, I think tells you a lot about where their genuine priorities are. It's not really about their issues with the legislation itself, because the legislation itself gives them everything they want. What they really want is their opportunity to engage in these debates on the House floor. Lauren Boebert is so delusional that she doesn't realize that she consistently embarrasses herself on the House floor. But nonetheless, I think that's what they want. I think they hate the fact that this was a deal that was made with Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden behind closed doors. They want to be able to be part of this process and be part of the theater in a bigger way, I think, for their campaigning purposes.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.